Wonderful. This is Sarah, and I'm here with Nischa Phair. And if you're listening to the podcast, you are already at a disadvantage. You're not watching the video because I have my have fun, you see it? Have fun and be amazing shirt on because we are talking about sex. So we're going to have fun and it's going to be amazing. How are you?
I'm so well. Thank you so much for having me on. It's a real treat.
I'm excited too. And I told you before, I'm surprised people don't ask me more sex questions considering what I do. And they really don't. So I'm hoping this will kind of, open the door so they know it's like a safe topic for me. But tell people a little bit about what you do.
Sure. So I am a trauma-informed sex educator and pleasure coach. I typically work with women, usually when they're in a kind of transition period in their lives after breakup, divorce, after trauma, after maybe a really traumatic birth or pregnancy experience, after miscarriage. The focus of my work is really on nervous system health and how we can use nervous system regulation techniques to really support us to have a more nourishing sex life, because our sex organs and genitals are wired directly to every single aspect of our nervous system. So when our nervous system is shut down, so does our desire and our arousal.
Which is especially important if you're talking about a traumatic experience.
100%.
Right. And I love that you added childbirth in there because I have some friends who've been through that type of situation and it's all connected.
It is. And like we could do a show on that alone. I've worked with women with like fertility and struggling to get pregnant after a traumatic birth experience. Mm-hmm. Because the body doesn't want to go through that again, right? There's nothing physiologically, hormonally wrong in any way, shape, or form, but their nervous system just won't let it happen because it's still in that fear state. So I've had a lot of success supporting women in their fertility journey just through using self-regulation and pleasure work.
That is amazing. So excited about our conversation. Yeah. So one of the things that you and I talked about discussing is confidence. Yes. After a toxic parent, partner, boss, whatever it ends up being, it just really erodes people's confidence. And especially if it was in a romantic scenario or a parent, right? Maybe you were shamed by a parent or something like that. It can really have repercussions of going out, putting yourself out there, or even being intimate in a relationship you're already in, right?
Totally. 100%. Yeah. And I think, the first thing to just put out there is the fact that because we live in a very repressed society, all of us, except for maybe the 1% who grew up in sex positive families, who may have their own stories of shame around, those upbringings, all of us have some level of repression and shame and feelings of inadequacy around sex. And so that's sort of a base level reality that we're all kind of working with.
That was like you dropped a bomb. I'm gonna hold up. So what you said is we are all working within our own sense of inadequacy. Like if you look like Beyonce or J-Lo and I saw Nicole Kidman in something, and she's actually from my state right now, so I'm not throwing bad things on her, but she was in something you could tell she'd had a lot of work done, and so when you think about I'm insecure about myself, it's like, well, if I looked like Nicole Kidman, and she's one of those beautiful people that have ever existed, but there was some insecurity in her that felt the need to, and not shaming that either, but it's just that bringing into that conversation of inadequacy is somewhat part of the human condition.
I think that the advent of visual media has made it much worse. And, you can trace back through our thousands of years of generational trauma and abuse, which is really just the effect of chronic nervous system dysregulation that happens because of war and famine and disease, right? When we're constantly living over a civilization in states of chronic fear and threat and displeasure, let's say.
Yeah.
excuse me. So with that base level reality, we also have a really interesting dynamic that's starting to come in with the rise of sex positivity, which is a wonderful, wonderful thing to begin to dismantle all of the repression that we're stepping into this world in, or with, pardon me. And it's the rise of sex positivity has the effect of, the flip side of it is it's making a lot of people feel inadequate about themselves sexually. And there's a huge element of sexual perfectionism that's starting to arise, where I see people in my practice all the time who are like, who've had relationships, who, you know, would not be like, they're not green in any way, but they still feel like they're not enough for their partner. Whether it's because, and this is a really big one, maybe a breakup happened because their partner wanted to explore polyamory, or wanted to explore certain practices that didn't feel like it was in alignment for them. And so they come out of this relationship feeling like they're not good enough, when really it's just a matter of everyone having their own unique sexual values and an authentic sexuality that is, you know, soulfully, personally, emotionally aligned to who we are as individuals, and needing to honor that. And that's a message that isn't really getting through enough, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's just interesting, the conversation. And I'm just so I actually listened to a podcast on accepting polyamorous relationship yesterday. That was interesting. And within that same conversation of inadequacy, not feeling good enough. And it was this, because I'm obsessed, obviously, all things relationships. I'm just like obsessed with all of them and why people do what they do. And she talked about, you know, not feeling good enough. Like if you want multiple partners, of course, I must not be good enough. That was like the default. So it really aligns with this conversation. And if you have been in a toxic relationship where someone made you feel bad about yourself, physically, emotionally, sexually, or in toxic relationships where everything is wrong except for how you have sex, so then they get more sex, but it's a game, not kindness or healthy way.
Yeah, it's not real.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. So what advice do you give to that woman who is just really struggling with her confidence based on a toxic past of some type?
I mean, everyone is different. I think that's really the greatest sort of piece of advice that I can put out there, is that everyone is different, and the best thing any of us can do for ourselves is be gentle with our process, and give yourself permission to experiment, to explore self-pleasure, to take workshops, and to step into your own experience of yourself as a sexual being. You know, when we come out of, I'm speaking for personal experience here, when we come out of toxic relationships, marriages, when I came out of mine, I felt like I had been held underwater for years, and then finally got to breathe air. And a big part of my recovery was because, let me backtrack a little bit. So I went into that relationship as the one with, I had more experience, I was more adventurous, more spontaneous. I was very interested in how sex can not just support us in our relationships, but in our lives, and how our sexual energy is an extension of our creativity and our capacity for connection. So that's always been kind of running the background. So I started the relationship like that. In the end, I couldn't even touch myself. I couldn't even self-pleasure. And it took me 6 months afterwards before I could get my nervous system regulated enough to actually be able to bring myself to feel safe enough to be with myself. So some people are going to come out of a relationship and be like, let's do this. I'm here and I'm going for it. And then others are going to feel really tentative. And both are correct. The most important thing is that we listen to to what our bodies want, and we listen to what is feeling exciting and interesting, you know?
I love the way I describe it to my coaching clients, not in this capacity, but we talk about dating, and I say, start to become a conversation starter, right? So when you meet people at the grocery store, start conversations. Like practice that before it's like, what do I say on this date? You know, I call it finding a shorter bridge to cross. So play, workshops, these types of things, maybe a shorter bridge to cross for women than like, how in the world am I supposed to take my clothes off in front of someone after 30 years in an abusive relationship, right? Is that?
Yes. So I always start with self-pleasure with all my clients and in all my work. That is really the foundation for having a healthy, authentic, nourishing sexual relationship with yourself first, right? Because if I can't be responsible for my pleasure with myself, how am I going to be able to be responsible for my pleasure when I'm with someone else? And being responsible for my pleasure doesn't just mean knowing what kind of orgasms I like or what toys I do or don't like. It's about being really attuned to my sense of boundaries and what is right. It's because if my boundaries are a little watery, or if I'm being a little bit, loose with them, that's going to affect how I experience pleasure, because it triggers my nervous system. And then I shut down, or I start fawning and performing. So I really like to expand this.
I want to slow down on that. Just sorry. So talking about performing, right? Because I'm sure that's something that's a huge issue.
Massive.
With, because in a toxic relationship, you're performing all the time for everything. So you're saying, and this is going to sound silly when I'm saying this, but you're saying that some people are having sex and it's not a performance. Like, I think some people need to hear that they are there for their pleasure and they are there to experience the person and experience the situation. It's not a performance. They're trying to figure out if they can pass or fail.
Yes. And the other person is deeply invested in your pleasure and doesn't want to do anything, wouldn't dare do anything that would jeopardize your experience of feeling soulfully, emotionally, relationally aligned together in an intimate experience. So that's when you look at the sort of unhealed, toxic fawning and performing patterns versus the healed, authentic sexuality where we're really deeply aligned with ourselves and in our integrity. That's what we're working towards ultimately.
Absolutely. I just wanted to whoa. It's such a different thing, because then you're entering into another relationship and your thought is, okay, I have to perform and get it right or they won't like me. That bridge is so long to cross before you even go on a first date.
Yes. Which is why self-pleasure has to be, I believe has to be the, step one.
Yeah. So what are some of your tips to kind of start that process? If someone's like, it's like a rocky desert down there, I go, just really nervous.
There are a couple of issues. It depends on, I can leave some links the things I talk about, but there are a few issues, because as women get older, and especially as they move through menopause, dryness can be an issue, which makes sex really painful. It can make us not want to touch ourselves or feel intimate. So there's one tool that I absolutely love. I've used it myself and I shouldn't say recommend to other women. And are you familiar with LED light technology, like the face? Yeah. So there's one for, it's a wand and you insert it into your vagina, and it's amazing. It builds collagen, it restores lubrication, it can heal sort of issues around the cervix. It's phenomenal. And I am sort of at the very early beginnings of perimenopause, and so I don't really notice it, but what I have noticed is a phenomenal well-being effect that's happened as a result of building up the integrity of my vaginal tissue. So there's a really strong connection that we don't often see in women in terms of sexual well-being and overall well-being. we look at men and we say, a guy with ED, obviously he's going to be low confidence and he's going to not feel very good about himself and he's not going to want to put himself out there. And then as soon as he gets his mojo back, it's all guns blazing. We're exactly the same. There's no different. And it can be really transformative for women. So that was one thing, but I feel like you have something you want to.
Yeah, because that's a point. I'm in a unique perspective in that I get to like, this expert says this expert, I get to start linking up some patterns, right? And so, for instance, female coaches talk about online dating more than male coaches typically. Like, isn't that interesting? Like when I ask like a guy, where do you meet, where do you send guys to meet people and where girls, and the females always talk about online dating. But I think statistically there are more men on online dating. So that may be fine.
100%.
Yeah, it's just interesting patterns. But an interesting pattern to point out is the coaches, people that I talk to in regards to sexual health, have this real sense of sexual health and mental, emotional well-being that is interconnected. When I feel like, dating coaches, whoever else, it's like you put that piece of you like in a box and put it on a shelf and then pick it up sometimes or put it back sometimes or lock it away or try to, and I think that's worth noting. I do want to say yes, I agree with you. And I want to emphasize to our listeners that that's a pattern I've picked up from lots of people who do what you do. And that's not something the average person knows or talks about.
No, at all. And, that compartmentalization of our sexuality it's part of what causes the wounding and the pain for us, because it's a separation, it's a splitting, right? The thing that we all need to get really clear on is that, I take the same body, the same self, the same histories into the bedroom as I do into the grocery store, as I do when I'm making dinner, as I do when I'm making love. I'm the same person. We take all our affectations, all our hangups, all our anxieties. And there's this idea, and I think this sort of to your point of performing in bed, that we are supposed to jump into a sexual encounter and leave all of that behind us, which is so sad, because that means that we're never going to be our true selves. We're not being our authentic selves in those encounters. There is nothing in our human experience that is so repressed, and yet which we're supposed to perform with absolute perfection.
I love that you brought up the perfectionism too, because I do think that's changed. I remember when I was in college and my college roommate got married and she was like, sex isn't like it looks in the movies. And I was like, oh, what's that going to mean? Like, I don't know what that means. And it was just like, we were like trying to figure it out and try to, have that conversation. But really the images we have of people of cinematic sex, even if it's not porn, it's just regular television. 50 years ago, no one would have had those images of perfection in their head. Not a one.
No, and now they're everywhere.
Yeah. This isn't even a porn conversation. This is like a movie you're flipping through channels.
Yeah,
absolutely. So that sense of perfection, I think, is important. So do you feel like that's something women in particular do in their heads, or that's something men are expecting? Yeah, may I ask it that way?
Both. I love this question. So it's both. Men are exposed to images that set these expectations of what they think femininity should be, what they think feminine sexuality should look like, or what the experience of feminine sexuality should be. Women are exposed to these images and are primed to play them out, to act out the sex goddess, to, be the one thing that I really push back against is the divine feminine. I think the divine feminine ideology can really trigger a lot of fawning and performing in women. I don't
And she's
deny that it
talking
exists.
about people pleasing, like flight, freeze, on. So it's like a very people pleasing nature. In case anyone didn't know what you're saying.
Sorry, thank you. Yes.
That's what I'm here for.
So fawning is all, it's people pleasing. It's the belief, you know, when we're talking about it in sex, it's the belief that, say, I have to be a sex goddess in order to be accepted, in order to be loved, in order to get them to stay. My pleasure is less important than their pleasure. My need to feel safe is not as important as their need to get off. All of these kind of messages would be in keeping with a kind of fawning and performing experience. So that dynamic between men and women, of men expecting it, and it's also the conversations they have amongst themselves, doesn't help. So the fact that men are expecting it and women are being conditioned to try and meet those unrealistic expectations really sets women and men in heterosexual relationships up to fail in a lot of ways. And men, because of these images, and these are even like good guys, we're not talking about all the toxic ones out there, they don't know to encourage a woman to actually experience herself authentically, because they're only doing what they've been shown, what they've been told. Everyone's kind of acting out this story. So that's a, you know, I think it's a really actually wonderful opportunity when we come to a break in a toxic relationship, because it's this wonderful chance to rewrite all of those old stories and to actually step into an authentic version of ourselves, whether it's sexually, whether it's in work, in our families, what have you.
That's awesome. Well, tell people where they can find more about you and your work.
Sure. So my website is nischaphair.com. I'm on Instagram at Nischa Phair, and I'll include a link for your listeners for a little free coaching tool resource that folks can begin to start to ask some questions and do some investigation on their own experiences and their relationship to pleasure and where they want to go forward. So it's just a really quick, it's called Pleasure Prompts, and it's just a really lovely way to begin the process.
So yeah, is that where you would start? You talked about your 6 months where you didn't feel safe to even start the process. Is that where you would tell people who didn't feel safe to start the process?
Yeah, it's funny because I think the work that I've created, so I've created my own system of working with pleasure work because I was unsatisfied with the experience that I had, and I need to do this better so that people don't get into more trouble. So yeah, everything that I've created is sort of designed to be what I felt what would have been supportive, like really supportive to like my heart and my soul at the time, as opposed to being told that this is what your sexuality needs to look like and this is how you need to go out into the world and be with other people. These you know, musts and shoulds, they're a killer. Right. So it's just designed to be a really compassionate way of dipping your toe into the water.
Shorter bridges to cross. For anyone listening, no idea. That's awesome. So if you had one message that you wish everyone in the world knew, that they currently maybe don't, what would your message be?
I think that we are our bodies. That who I am as my identity is not separate from my physical being, that all of the stories of everything that we are and all of the goodness that we are here to bring and contribute to the world is stored in every single one of the 70 trillion cells in our bodies. And it's an absolute, astounding, brilliant, beautiful thing that we're here. So.
I love it. Thank you so much for helping us today on our How to Be Amazing Sex Talk, and for helping us become a little farther on our journey to becoming toxic person proof.